It was a rainy afternoon when Clara received the call that would change her life. A millionaire businessman, known for his wealth and cold demeanor, was seeking a nanny for his young daughters. At first, Clara thought it was a mistake. She had no experience with high society families or their extravagant expectations. But something about the opportunity tugged at her heart. Perhaps it was the promise of stability or the chance to provide a better future for her own children. Whatever it was, she didn't hesitate. Clara had always lived a simple life. Raised in a small town, she had never experienced the lavish lifestyle that most people only dreamed of. Her days were filled with modest routines, working hard to make ends meet while raising her children on her own. She never imagined a world where wealth and luxury were everyday occurrences. And yet there she was, sitting in the waiting room of a grand mansion, nervously clutching her resume. The door opened, and a tall man in his late 40s stepped into the room. His sharp suit and commanding presence immediately made Clara feel out of place. He had the look of someone who was used to getting what he wanted, someone who could make decisions with a single glance. This was Mr. Alexander Knight, the man who had built an empire from the ground up, and who, despite his success, had never quite learned the art of warmth. His eyes were piercing, his expression unreadable. Yet there was something in the way he looked at Clara that made her uneasy. "Clara Thompson?" he asked, his voice smooth yet authoritative. "Yes, sir," she replied, standing up quickly. "Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I've read your background. You've worked with children before, but I need someone more than just an ordinary nanny." Clara nodded, trying to suppress the nerves in her stomach. What did he mean by more? Was this job not what she thought it was? He continued, explaining that his daughters, Emily and Sophie, were not like other children. They had been through a lot. Their mother had passed away a few years ago, and he had been busy with his business, unable to provide them with the care and attention they needed. The girls, despite their wealth, were lonely, isolated in a world of luxury that lacked warmth. Clara's heart softened as he spoke. She could feel his desperation, his desire for someone who could bridge the gap between their world and the life the girls longed for. "There's one more thing," Mr. Knight said, his voice lowering. "I don't want just anyone. I need someone who is grounded, someone who understands the value of family. My daughters need a mother figure, not a servant. Are you capable of that?" Clara hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. Could she really fill the void left by their mother? She had no formal training, no fancy degrees. All she had was love and the desire to help. But as she looked into Mr. Knight's eyes, she saw something else, something vulnerable. Maybe this wasn't just about the girls. Maybe he needed help too. "I'll do my best, sir," Clara said, her voice steady despite the doubts swirling in her mind. "I can be what they need." Mr. Knight studied her for a moment before nodding. "All right, you're hired. Welcome to the family." Clara left the mansion that day with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had just entered a world so different from her own, a world where everything was grand and polished, but where the human connection seemed lost. Over the next few weeks, she began her new role, moving into the mansion and caring for Emily and Sophie. The girls were sweet but distant. They had everything anyone could want: clothes, toys, and endless entertainment, but it was clear that their hearts were empty. Every day, Clara did her best to fill that emptiness. She played with them, helped them with their homework, and listened when they needed someone to talk to. Slowly, she began to see a change in them. Emily, the older of the two, started to smile more. Sophie, the younger one, began to ask questions about Clara's life, about how she had grown up. For the first time in years, the house was filled with laughter and warmth. Clara was beginning to feel like she had found her place. But things weren't as simple as they seemed. Mr. Knight, though grateful for Clara's work, kept his distance. He would come home late, barely acknowledging her presence. At times, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, as though he was trying to figure out whether or not she was truly trustworthy. And there was something about the way he looked at her when their eyes met, something that suggested more than just gratitude. One evening, as Clara was putting the girls to bed, she overheard a conversation between Mr. Knight and his lawyer. They were discussing the future of the mansion, the business, and something about a mysterious investor. Clara didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words she overheard made her uneasy. There was talk of selling the mansion, and of decisions that could change everything. Why was Mr. Knight acting so secretive? Was it possible that his intentions for hiring Clara were not just about his daughters? As the days passed, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would unravel the life she had just started to build. Would Mr. Knight's secrets destroy everything? And what would happen to the girls if he no longer needed her? One evening, as she prepared dinner, Clara noticed something strange, a letter on Mr. Knight's desk, partially hidden beneath a stack of papers. Her curiosity got the better of her. She walked over and, without thinking, picked it up. The words on the envelope were clear. For Mr. Alexander Knight, confidential. But just as she was about to open it, the door creaked behind her. She spun around, her heart racing. Mr. Knight was standing there, staring at her with a look she couldn't quite place. "Clara," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "What are you doing with that?" Clara froze, the letter still clutched tightly in her hand. She felt the air around her grow tense as Mr. Knight's gaze bore into her. There was no warmth in his eyes, just a cold, calculating look that made her stomach churn. She didn't know how to respond. Was she in trouble? Had she crossed a line by being curious about something that wasn't hers? I was just, she stammered, but her words failed her. The letter felt heavy in her palm, as if it was no longer just a piece of paper, but a symbol of everything she didn't know about this man and his world. Just what? Mr. Knight's voice was sharp, but there was a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite identify. "Do you think you can just snoop around in my personal things? In my life?" Clara swallowed hard, her pulse racing. She had never intended to invade his privacy, but the strange feeling in her gut told her there was more to this story than he had let on. More than just a businessman struggling with his daughters. She slowly placed the letter back on the desk, trying to mask the unease that was growing inside her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice steady but barely. "I didn't mean to overstep. I overheard something earlier, and it got me thinking." Mr. Knight's eyes narrowed. "What did you hear?" Clara hesitated. It wasn't her place to intrude into his life, but her concern for the girls, and the feeling that something wasn't quite right pushed her to speak. "I heard you talking about selling the mansion, and some investor. And well, I thought it might have something to do with the girls. With their future." For a long moment, Mr. Knight didn't speak. His face remained impassive, unreadable. Clara held her breath, unsure of what to expect. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "You're overthinking things, Clara. This isn't about the girls," he said, almost dismissively. "It's business. You don't need to worry about it." Clara nodded, but the words didn't sit right with her. It was too easy for him to dismiss her concerns, to brush away the unease she felt. He had always been secretive, but something in the way he said it this time made her feel like she was being kept in the dark on purpose. She wanted to push further, but she knew better than to challenge him any more than she already had. "I understand," she replied quietly, her mind racing with questions that wouldn't let go. But as she turned to leave the room, Mr. Knight called out to her, his voice softer now. though still tinged with something she couldn't quite place. "Clara, I trust you with my daughters. Don't forget that." She nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, the tension lingered. The more she thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. Why had he hired her in the first place? Was it really just for the girls? Or was there something more to his intentions? And why was he so secretive about everything that surrounded them? Days passed, and Clara threw herself into her work, caring for the girls as best as she could. Emily and Sophie, though still grieving their mother, seemed to be adjusting to the presence of someone new in their lives. But despite the progress she had made, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She started to notice little things, small details that didn't add up. Mr. Knight would often leave for long meetings, sometimes not returning until late at night. The girls, though they adored Clara, seemed to withdraw whenever he was around, as if they, too, sensed that something was off. One night, after a particularly quiet dinner, Clara decided to explore the mansion more thoroughly. She had seen only the main areas, the elegant living room, the grand staircase, the immaculate kitchen, but she had never ventured far beyond that. Something told her that if she was going to understand the truth, she needed to know more about the house and its hidden corners. As she wandered through the hallway, she noticed a door at the far end of the corridor. It was partially ajar, and despite her better judgment, she pushed it open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of a lamp in the corner. It appeared to be an office, though not the one she had seen Mr. Knight use. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books and files. But it wasn't the books that caught Clara's attention. It was the large, ornate safe that stood against the wall, its door slightly open. Her heart raced. Was this a sign? Was this where the truth was hidden? Without thinking, she stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached for the safe. She didn't know what she was looking for, perhaps a clue, an answer. But as her fingers brushed against the cold metal, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Clara. She spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. Mr. Knight stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry, but there was a certain coldness in his gaze that made Clara freeze. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice measured. I'm sorry," Clara stammered, feeling caught in the act. "I didn't mean to intrude. Mr. Knight stepped closer, his gaze never leaving her. "I thought I'd told you before. This is none of your concern." Clara stood there, her mind racing. She could see it now, his mask of control slipping, revealing something deeper. Something darker. She could feel it in the air, the weight of a secret that was slowly unraveling. "What's going on, Mr. Knight?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you hiding all of this? What are you not telling me?" For a long moment, Mr. Knight didn't respond. He seemed to weigh her words carefully, as if deciding whether to tell her the truth or to shut her out completely. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "You wouldn't understand, Clara. Some things are better left buried." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing alone in the dimly lit room. She stared after him, the mystery deepening, her heart pounding with the realization that she was about to uncover something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. What was Mr. Knight hiding? And what would happen when the truth finally came to light? Clara stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the door where Mr. Knight had disappeared. His words echoed in her mind, his cryptic statement about things better left buried, leaving her with a gnawing sense of dread. She had crossed a line. Of that much, she was sure. But now, more than ever, she felt a burning need to uncover the truth. Something wasn't right about Mr. Knight. Something wasn't right about the way he was keeping secrets from everyone, especially from his daughters. The next morning, as she prepared breakfast for Emily and Sophie, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. There was a heaviness in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The girls, as usual, were distant, playful with each other, but cold toward Mr. Knight. They seemed to understand more than anyone gave them credit for, and Clara wondered just how much they knew about their father's secrets. After breakfast, Clara excused herself and began searching for answers. She found herself standing outside Mr. Knight's study again, the very room where she had been caught the night before. She couldn't stop thinking about the safe and what might be hidden inside. Without hesitation, she pushed the door open, her heart racing. The room was empty, but the safe still stood in the corner, its door slightly ajar, taunting her with its secrets. Clara's fingers trembled as she approached the safe. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as she quickly scanned the room. No one was around. This time, there was no one to stop her. She had to know. She entered the combination she had memorized from the brief glimpse she'd gotten the night before. With a soft click, the door swung open. Inside, Clara found more than she had expected. The safe wasn't filled with money or valuable documents, but with folders, files and papers filled with names, dates, and photographs. As her hand skimmed through them, one particular folder caught her attention. It was marked with a red stamp, CONFAVEDENTIAL, and inside, Clara found something that made her blood run cold. The photos were of Mr. Knight, but not in the way she was used to seeing him. These were photos from a different time, a different life. There were images of him with a woman, someone Clara didn't recognize, holding hands, laughing, looking as if they were deeply in love. There were also papers that detailed a financial arrangement, one that made no sense unless the woman was somehow connected to Mr. Knight's past in a way Clara couldn't comprehend. The more she read, the clearer it became. The woman in the photos was not just a lover. She was his wife. And from the looks of things, she had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, along with a large sum of money that Mr. Knight had been hiding ever since. Just as Clara was about to piece everything together, the door to the study creaked open. She spun around, her heart in her throat. Mr. Knight was standing in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes full of anger. "You shouldn't have done this," he said, his voice dangerously calm. Clara felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to back down. Who was she? What happened to her? She demanded, her voice trembling but strong. Mr. Knight took a step toward her, his face hardening. "She was my wife, Clara, and she wasn't the person you think she was." His voice broke, but he quickly regained control. "I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't want to destroy the image I've built. But she had secrets too. Dangerous ones. She had been involved with people who weren't good for our family. I had to protect the girls." Clara felt a shiver of realization. Everything Mr. Knight had done, every strange decision, every odd behavior, it all started to make sense. He had been trying to protect his daughters, trying to shield them from the dangerous life their mother had been a part of, a life filled with betrayal, crime, and dark connections. "But you didn't tell anyone the truth. You kept all of this hidden," Clara said, her voice softening as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. "You were trying to protect them, but you were also keeping them in the dark. You didn't want them to know the truth." Mr. Knight sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. "I never wanted them to know, but they deserve to know the truth. And now so do you." He paused, as if weighing something, and then, with a heavy heart, he handed Clara a small envelope. "This is for you. I never meant for you to get caught up in all this, but you've become part of their lives now. And I think you deserve to know what happened. You've earned that much." Clara opened the envelope, her hands trembling. Inside was a letter, written in the same neat handwriting as the documents she had found earlier. It was a letter from his wife, dated just days before her disappearance. It was filled with apologies, explanations, and a confession. She had been planning to leave Mr. Knight, but not for the reasons he had assumed. She had been threatened, blackmailed by the very people Mr. Knight had been trying to protect his family from. And in the end, she had been forced to disappear for her own safety. As Clara read the letter, she felt a wave of sympathy for Mr. Knight. The man she had seen as cold and secretive was, in fact, a father doing everything he could to protect his children from a past they didn't understand. He had made mistakes, but his intentions had always been for their well-being. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Mr. Knight said quietly, his voice cracking. "But sometimes you have to make impossible choices." Clara looked at him, her heart softening. She could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of his choices. But she also saw the man who was trying to be a better father, a better person, despite everything that had happened. "Thank you for telling me," Clara said, her voice filled with understanding. The girls, they deserve to know the truth too. But they also deserve a chance to heal. Mr. Knight nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You've been more of a mother to them than I ever could be. I won't forget that." As Clara walked away from the study, she realized that this chapter of her life had come to an unexpected but satisfying conclusion. She had uncovered the truth about Mr. Knight, his past, and the family secrets he had spent so long hiding. And while the future still held uncertainties, she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer just the nanny. She was a part of their family, a family that, despite its dark past, was now finding its way toward healing and hope. As the days went on, things began to change. Mr. Knight became more open with his daughters, sharing with them the truths they had long been kept from. And though it wasn't easy, the healing process began. The mansion, once filled with silence and secrets, now echoed with the sounds of laughter and love. Clara had helped them find their way, and in doing so, she had found a place in their hearts. The past may have been filled with shadows, but the future was bright with possibility. And for Clara, that was all that mattered.